There we go. Hey, everybody. Chuck Marone here with Strong Towns. It is our member drive week. And one of the things that we get requested to do a lot and probably don't do often enough is just to share some of our core information, our core curbside chat. I'm going to give you one of those presentations today. I'm going to give you, while people are joining us here and getting acclimated, I'm going to give you a little bit of the history of the curbside chat, just so you know where this all came from. And I think it ties in real nicely with the fact that this is our member week here at Strong Towns. Back when I started writing in 2008, I really didn't know where this whole thing would go. I wasn't setting out to start a movement or, change the world as much as I was trying to figure some things out for myself, things that didn't make a lot of sense. Why were we investing so heavily in growth and job creation and economic development? And why were we, in the course of doing all this stuff, going further into debt? Why were our taxes going up? Why were the cities that were growing the fastest, in many ways, the ones that were, from the indicators that you would expect, not doing well? I live in a region that is pretty fast growing. We had very large population growth between really the mid 1990s up to the end of the housing bubble bursting. And, despite this, taxes kept going up. Public budgets got tighter. We're having discussions here about shutting off streetlights overnight to save money, laying off police and firefighters, closing the public library early. All these things that we were talking about doing because we just didn't have the money, yet we were seeing all this growth. And not only all the growth, but we were making millions and millions of dollars of investment to try to induce even more growth. And I got to the point myself where I said, this doesn't make any sense. Like it's not correlating. We're investing in our future. It should be paying off. Why is it not? And I'll tell you, as an engineer, as a planner, I did not set out to be, an anti anything really. I felt the work that I was doing, building curvy streets and cul-de-sacs, the work that I was doing, running sewer and water out to the edge of town, the work that I was doing, putting in frontage roads and helping build the big box stores. I really thought that was work that was making America strong and prosperous and successful. And it was only, in the 2004, 2005, 6 range that I started to question this. And by the time I got to 2008, we had gone through this crazy election cycle. For context, it seemed crazy at the time. I realize now it seems quaint, but at the time it seemed rather crazy. And nobody was talking about any of the things that I thought were important. And when they were talking about doing the exact opposite. And so I sat down and I said, I'm going to write. I'm going to sit down and write 3 days a week. Writing is one of these acts that you do that forces you to think through your thoughts and kind of enunciate them. And I'm also going to expose these ideas to a broader community of people. I have been talking to my peers and colleagues in my local area. The feedback that I was getting was not great. It was a little bit on the lines of, yeah, Chuck, this is really cool, but you're crazy. And why don't you just shut up and work because you'll make more money that way. If you rock the boat, this is going to be bad for your career. So why would you do that? Literally, that was the feedback that I was getting from friends, right? So I started to write, and my idea was I'm going to reach audiences outside of our area and really talk to professionals and kind of get a sense of, am I crazy or not? Am I onto something valid or not? Two friends of mine Ben Olson, who was a colleague of mine, him and I ran Community Growth Institute. He still does this kind of work today in what remains of that organization. And John Commerce, a really wonderful guy who invested a lot of time and energy into getting to know me and helping things, in the early days, both suggested that we should start a nonprofit, that the ideas contained in this blog were important enough to start a nonprofit with. And at first I really didn't want anything to do with it. I was not a big fan of nonprofit organizations for a variety of reasons I won't go into. But they convinced me that they would fill out the paperwork, and John even paid the fee initially. I mean, these were two generous people who really pushed me and got this thing started. A year later, so this would have been the end of 2010, we had a 501c3, which takes a period of time to get, but we got it by the end of 2010. And then in early 2011, I was contacted by a foundation here in Minnesota, the Blandon Foundation up in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. And they said, we've been reading your stuff. We find it very interesting. You're a nonprofit. Why don't you come up and tell us about your programs? Come up and tell us about what you do. Well, we didn't have any programs. I didn't know what we did. It was just me writing this blog. And, we were trying to get the message out. But it was really just me at that point writing. And John and Ben would write a little bit and help out. And that was great, but it was a very, very small conversation. So I put together a presentation that was, in a sense, a summation of the things that I saw going on and how I would approach them differently. And I went up and I gave that presentation to the Blandon people. That is essentially the Curbside Chat. It has changed and evolved a lot. If you haven't seen it for 3 or 4 years, if you haven't seen it for a year, there are changes that are not subtle in it that are important. It's an evolving conversation. But the first one was given to the Blandon Foundation. And I said, this is the message I'm trying to share. And they said to me, Chuck, this is really important. We would like you to share this with as many people as you can. And they gave me 3 years of startup money, basically allowed me to go half time with Strong Towns and raise the rest of the money so I could be full-time so I could start doing this. And their requirement to me was go out and share this message with as many places as possible. Just do everything you can to get this message out. And that's what I've been doing ever since. I've given the Curbside Chat presentation. We stopped counting. I'm guessing we're well over 200 times now around the country, around the continent. I gave this last week in Calgary, a variation on this. And it really lays out, I think, in a succinct way, some of the kind of core concepts of Strong Towns and some of the things that we find most important. And really, I think that as a culture, we struggle with the most. So with that introduction, I'm gonna bring my slides up right now, and we're gonna Curbside Chat this baby. I do want to put in a little. Oh, you're getting the bad. Let me give you the full screen version here, so it looks better. Yeah, and you're still gonna have to put up with me there on the screen as we go. That's okay. You can look away. Just our mission is to support a model of development that allows our cities, towns, and neighborhoods to become financially strong and resilient. If you're just getting to know us this week, come back next week. This week we're on Member Drive. It's a wonderful time to highlight the great things our members are doing and invite people into our movement to help us and support us. But if you're brand new here, welcome. We're so happy to have you. Come back next week, and we're going to be back to kind of regularly scheduled programming, and you'll get all the stuff that you would normally get here. But for all of you who have been with us a while and who feel this conversation is very important and you want to see it get in front of more and more people, this is our Member Drive. Go to our website today, click on Join the Movement, become a member. Your membership does so much for us. It not only gives us the revenue that we need to make this whole thing work, but it grows our movement in a significant way, a way that, having someone who is committed to sending us, even if it's $5 a month, just a little bit of resource, puts another check in that ledger and allows us to say our movement is growing, it's becoming bigger, and that has an effect all its own. People are starting to take notice. There are very few places left where no one has heard of our conversation. We want to get into those last places, and then we want to grow the numbers there so that there isn't going to be a conversation in this country about the future of our cities where we don't have people who are conversant in Strong Town's language there to have a conversation and impact that. So let's start the chat. Here are two ancient cities. The one on the left is an ancient city called Fertile Crescent, something like 4,000 BC. The one on the right, of course, is ancient Rome. When we look at these cities, we're looking at places that were designed around the dominant transportation technology of the day, that of course being your 2 feet. People would walk everywhere. So the size, the scale, the layout, the distance between different types of things people would do on a normal day, all this was scaled around a society of people who walked. We can fast forward thousands of years. This is my hometown back in the early 1900s. This is Brainerd, Minnesota. I live a couple hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul today. This is what it looked like over 110 years ago, 113 years ago. People arrived by stagecoach, they'd arrive by train. But once they got here, they would walk everywhere they went. And so the scale, the spacing, the distance between different types of things people would do on a normal day, all this was scaled around a society of people who walked. When we look at today, obviously we've started to build our places around a different transportation technology. We started to build them around the automobile. We came up with different building types and different building styles and different ways of arranging things on the landscape. If you were to ask people today to explain this transition, they'd likely talk about it in terms of progress. We used to be a society of people who walked everywhere, so we build cities around people who walked. Now we're a society of people who drive everywhere, so we build cities around people who drive. Someday we will have jet cars, and we'll build cities around people in jet cars. And someday we'll teleport, and our cities will look completely different than they do today, right? This is a narrative of progress. And it's very comforting for us to think of it in this way because it puts us on this continuum of things always getting better. There's another way to look at this, though, that isn't quite as affirming. And I want to put this idea in the back of your head as kind of a backdrop to the conversation that we're going to have today. When we look at even ancient Ur, what we're looking at is a city that had been preceded by thousands and thousands of years of human experimentation on how to build cities. People tried things, what they worked, what worked, they would expand upon. What didn't work, they would, give up on, go away. The people died, cities went away, they failed. By the time you get to ancient Rome, you have an approach to building cities that had been honed through thousands and thousands of years of trial and error experimentation. By the time you get to my hometown in the early 1900s, you have an approach to building places that is essentially universal. We can go around the world to different continents, different cultures, different latitudes. And while we see different architectural styles and different building materials, the essential layout and design of structure of cities is universal. These are places built around people who walked, refined and honed over thousands and thousands of years of experimentation. When we look at this pattern of development, when I was a young engineer and I would ask questions, people would say, well, Chuck, this is the way things have always been done. Well, of course, this is not the way things have always been done. We just started doing this a mere 100 years ago at most, really accelerating it about 70 years ago. We didn't try these ideas out. I'm from Minnesota. We didn't try this out in Wisconsin and see what those people did for a couple hundred years and then take the best ideas and migrate them here. We just did this across an entire continent, all within a generation. We didn't, get these ideas through trial and error. These ideas largely came from European intellectuals, universities, think tanks, the idea of the hierarchical road network, modern zoning, modern finance. These are all new concepts that we brought to the fore here in the last 100 years. it's important to understand what a huge experiment this is. It's important for us to grasp, because this is what is normal to us, how in the context of human history, it is incredibly abnormal. No society has ever done what we have done. No society has ever taken thousands of years of history and knowledge in how to build places, thrown it out, and done something completely and radically different, all within the very short time frame. We are living in the greatest experiment that's ever been tried. And in a sense, we're the guinea pigs, right? We are the guinea pigs. And this is an experiment, not just about the way we build our places, but the economic implications, the social implications, the cultural implications, the political implications of arranging ourselves in this vastly different way across the landscape. What we're going to talk about today are some of the financial ramifications of this, things that may or may not have been obvious to people at the time when they started down this path. One of the things that we did early on in Strong Towns was to take a look at our existing development pattern and try to understand financially what was going on. There is this mindset, certainly within the engineering profession. I think it's also in the planning profession, the economic development profession. There's a mindset that we have started to call the quantum theory of economic development. As I was putting together some of these models and looking at some of these things, the pushback that I would always get went along the lines of something like this, like, okay, Chuck, you look at one development and that one doesn't make a lot of sense. You look at this other one and that one may not make financial sense. And then you look at this other one and that one might not make financial sense. But what you're not counting is that these come together to form this greater whole. And it's the greater whole that is not really measurable. You know, when you measure the individual parts, it doesn't show this great like coming together. To me, that was way too comfortable. And my response, to that was always, well, how's that working out for you? Right? Like to me, that's like the central conundrum. But I also said, okay, well, if that's the case, this quantum theory of economic development, you can't measure it. You just have to trust that it's there and it's doing great. Even with that theory, there should be parts of our system that from a strict accounting standpoint are profitable. In other words, we should be able to look out over the landscape and find places that don't have a lot of white noise, a lot of complexity going on. We should be able to measure what's going on there and draw some inferences with the rest of the system. That would be such as this. This is a dead-end cul-de-sac. There's no through traffic here. There's no commercial traffic. This was built in the mid-1990s. When this was built, the city paid half the cost. The property owners paid the other half. We asked the question, okay, based on the taxes the city collects from the people who live along this road, the only people who use this road in any substantive way, if those people weren't there, if those homes weren't there, this road would not have any reason to exist, right? It's just there just for them. How long is it going to take the city to recoup the half that they spent to build that road? The answer to that was 37 years. Now, the road's not going to last 37 years, but it's going to take the city that long of collecting taxes just to break even. The long-term maintenance responsibility here is 100% the city's. Where's that money going to come from? It's not going to come from these property owners here. This is another subdivision. This one was built in the 1980s. Again, you'll see closed loop system, dead end cul-de-sac, no through traffic, no commercial traffic. There's no white noise in the background here. This is very simple residential subdivision. The only reason this road exists is to serve the properties that live here. If they weren't there, no road, right? So this was built in the early 1980s. The developer paid for all the costs. Those costs were then rolled over into the sale of the homes. People living here have been paying that cost on their mortgages and in their property values for years. At the same time, they've been paying taxes to the city for the maintenance of that roadway. The roadway had completely fallen apart. The city went out and fixed it. The cost was $354,000. We said, okay, based on the taxes the city collects from the people who live within this development, how long is it going to take them to recoup the money they just spent to build it or to fix that road? The answer is 79 years. Now, we all know that the road is not going to last 79 years. So we asked the question, okay, let's say the city wanted to collect between now and the time the road fell apart enough money from these property owners to actually pay to fix their road. What would that mean? It would mean an immediate 46% increase in taxes. with annual increases of 3% over inflation every year for the next 25 years, with all that money going just to maintain the roadway. The sewer, the water, the storm sewer, these are vastly, more expensive undertakings. Now, sometimes people say, okay, Chuck, we get it. We know we lose money on residential. We make it up on commercial. Commercials are cash cow. My gut response to that is always, okay, I don't know any corporation that loses money on 90% of what it does and tries to make it up in the last 10%. I don't know why an incorporated municipality would find that to be a good business strategy. Nonetheless, in many places, we've convinced ourselves that it doesn't matter what happens to residential property. As long as we have enough commercial, we're good to go. I got to get my regular kickstart in too, just for you longtime people know. I'm angling for a Mountain Dew endorsement of Strong Towns. I figure that will put us over the top. It may just cover my Mountain Dew budget, right? This is a business park. This was built in the mid-1990s. It was so successful, the city thought this was such a great project because every single lot is now built upon that they want to build the same exact thing on property they own right next door. They want to just actually mirror what is there. We asked the question, okay, if we could build the same exact thing for the same exact cost and get the same exact amount of investment, would this be a good project? In today's dollars, it would cost $2.1 million. Today, there are $6.6 million of improvements in this park. Now, pause. Of those improvements, 4 of those lots belong to a church. 2 of the lots are a school maintenance facility. They belong to the school district. 1 of the lots is a county maintenance garage. 1 of the lots is a city maintenance garage. None of these pay any taxes to the city, right? They're not to say they're not important. We need churches, we need schools, we need maintenance buildings. These are all important things, but none of them pay any taxes to the city. Of the remaining lots, the ones that theoretically would be taxpayers, every single one was given a long-term tax subsidy in order to attract them to move into this park. For the sake of our analysis, we had to assume, just to make the numbers come close to even working, that after this park was built, within 12 months, every single lot would be occupied by a full non-subsidized tax-paying entity, right? And that every penny of new revenue would go to retiring that bond. If that were the case, it would still take the city almost 3 decades, 29 years, just to break even. That's 29 years where everybody else's taxes would need to go up to pay to plow the snow, mow the ditches, provide police protection, fire protection, and all the other services that are needed. And that's in the most wildly optimistic scenario. When I gave that first presentation to the Blandon Foundation, I went through about 15 of these. I was very proud of them. I found over the years that I can make the point in just 3, but there's a bunch of these case studies on our site, and we do analyses like these all the time. If you're interested in those, strongtowns.org is the website. Go there, check them out. But let me show you what's going on. And I don't know if my pointer is going to come through or not here. I think so. So let me show you what's going on. And I'm going to apologize here. I like charts. I'm an engineer. It's a career, it goes with the turf. There's 4 charts in this presentation. Actually, I might have taken one out. There's at least 3 charts in this presentation. We'll see if there's a magic 4th, but it might not be there. That's okay. There's 3 charts in this presentation at least. And the next 3 slides, once we go through those, no charts. So hang with me if you're not a chart person, but I'll walk you through this. This won't be painful or difficult. Let's say that a developer comes to our community, has a piece of property, says, I would like to develop this piece of property. I am willing to, as a developer, pay for all of the residential home construction. I'm willing to pay for all the commercial buildings. I am willing to follow all of your regulations and rules. I'm not asking for any subsidies from you. I'm willing to, at my expense, go out and build all the required and necessary roads and streets and curb and sidewalk, the pipes, the pumps, the valves, the meters. I'll pay for all that. I'll do that. The only thing that I'm asking as a developer is that when I get done making this huge investment in your community, that you, the city, the taxpayers, the public, agree that you will take over the responsibility to service and maintain this stuff. You'll take over the long-term obligation to take care of this stuff. What would we say? Well, I've been in many, many meetings like this, right? And usually you don't get a deal that good. You're in a deal much worse than that. The city council says, oh my gosh, amazing. We don't have to pay for this stuff. You pay for it. We get all this new tax base, all this new growth. We fall all over ourselves to make projects like this happen. This is kind of the ideal scenario, right? So let's say we're smart, prudent people. We've heard of this strong town stuff. We want to do the right thing. So when this money comes in from this new development, what we're going to do is we're going to take the portion that would normally get spent in other parts of the city, fixing and maintaining and serving stuff, and we're going to set that aside. And every year when the money comes in, we'll take that portion, we'll set it aside, we'll allow it to accumulate, and we'll save for the day when we have to make good on all these promises we're making as we grow. Here's what that looks like. In year one, everything is brand new. You take that portion and you set it aside of the new revenue coming in. In year two, you add to what you had in year one. In year three, you add a little bit more to year two, and on and on and on. You can see every year you're just adding money, but you're not having to spend anything. A 5-year-old road isn't costing you anything. A 10-year-old sidewalk isn't costing you anything. A 15-year-old pipe isn't costing you anything. And so you get out a couple of decades and you've had nothing but money coming in, nothing going out. You're feeling very, very rich, very wealthy. The problem comes in this example, in year 25, when you have to actually make good on that promise you made way, way back in year one. And what you find is that the cumulative amount of growth you've had coming in, the cumulative amount of money is insufficient. And from a cash flow standpoint, you run far into the negative. Now, cities are not one development, right? Cities are a series of developments, a collection of neighborhoods. So let's say that our developer comes back in, says, that worked out really well for you. That worked out really well for me. I would like to do a similar size development. And every other year from this point forward, a developer does a similar size development. In other words, the ideal scenario, nice, steady, continuous growth. And we take that money and we set it aside and we save it for the day when we have to make good on all these promises we're making as we grow. Here's what that looks like. In year one, you've got your first development that comes online. It pays for, during the entire 25 years shown here. In year three, you've got a second development that comes in. Year 5, year 7, year 9, and on and on. And you can see, not only do you just have money coming in, nothing going out, but you're having all kinds of growth. You're having growth upon growth upon growth. Your cash actually starts to accelerate upwards. You're feeling very, very wealthy. And when you get to year 25, the year you have to make good on that very first promise you made way back in year one, yeah, you've got to spend a little bit of money, but it's not a big deal, right? You've had all this growth. The growth creates what we call the illusion of wealth. Because as we all intuitively understand, if you lose money on every transaction, you don't make it up in volume. When you lose money over the long term on every project that you do, the further you go out in time, the more downward pressure there is on your budget. This is the answer to that question that I struggled with for so long. Why are cities broke? Why, despite the growth, despite the investment, despite the job creation, despite all the things we've done to get things going, why do our cities that are, even the ones that are growing, struggle so mightily? And the answer is that, we are living way out here. We're living way out here on the far edge. We have been growing in a way that has accumulated generations and generations of liabilities. And now those liabilities are all coming due. And in a sense, we're drowning in them. They're drowning out our efforts to create more and more growth. Now, I want to pause here for a second because I think it's be very easy to kind of write this off based on our own personal narratives. We just got through the recent election in 2016, and I look at this chart and interpolate from the election that we just had, which to me were two 70-year-olds explaining how they were going to take us back to what they thought were the glory days of American history. We're going to make America great again. We're going to become kind, compassionate people again. We're going to essentially restore what in this timeline is this little period of time right here. Both candidates were alive during this period of time. Both of them saw this as the like heyday of America. This is when we were prosperous from a business standpoint. This is when we created good American jobs. This is when we had government that was growing and kind and compassionate and giving lots of social programs. You can look back at history and point to this kind of golden age, and it's right there, right? That was it. But we live way out here today. We live way, way, way out here. I want to ask you, just pose a couple questions here about this chart that are really important for us to think through. The first one is, do you see yourself here? We can go back to that presidential election and the narrative that we have about local government is, and government in general goes along the lines of, government is lazy, bureaucrats don't care, they have no incentives to do good work. On the other side, we'll say corporations are greedy, the rich aren't paying their fair share. Whatever your narrative is, do you see yourself in this graph? Because this is the way humans are wired. This is why people smoke, right? This is why you will go have that bowl of ice cream and sit in front of the couch instead of going for a jog tonight, right? Like, okay, boy, this ice cream is really good. I'm really enjoying this TV show. Uh-oh, heart disease, right? Like that's us. That's humans. That's the way the human mind works. Psychologists call this temporal discounting. We are strongly wired to highly value positive feedback today and to deeply, deeply discount potential negative feedback in the future. That's how we're wired. That's who we are as people. Let me ask another question here. What happened to the societies of the past that organized their local economy around exploiting this human flaw? What happened to them? They're not here anymore, right? That they didn't make it. Their ideas were not passed on to the next generation as the way you do things. Those ideas didn't move on. Obviously, there's some huge implications to all this, right? The way we become accustomed to growing is on the wane. Grants from the federal and state government, the kind of free-flowing transportation spending, and the ability of the private sector to take on massive amounts of really unpayable debt. These things are all on the wane, and they were the central drivers of local growth for the last 70 years, and they're all in decline. What this means is that local governments are going to be forced to absorb the costs of their own development pattern. If we want that road fixed, we're going to have to pay for it. If we want that pipe repaired, that money is going to have to come from us. This can't be done in the current pattern of development without some incredibly large tax increases and or some devastatingly large cuts in services. Now, everybody knows this, right? This is a debate we're having at every level of government all over the country. How big is the tax increase going to be? Who's going to pay for it? How deep is the service cut going to be? And where is that going to be felt? It's critical that everybody see the third variable in this sentence, the third variable being the current pattern of development. As long as we continue to build in a way that is functionally insolvent, there's no way that our cities avoid insolvency. As long as we continue to build with a style and an approach that gives us an illusion of wealth today in exchange for enormous long-term liabilities, there's no way that our cities avoid default. Whether it's a hard default, like we see in places like Stockton and Detroit and San Bernardino, or whether it's a soft default, like we see in thousands of cities across this country, where they lay off police officers and firefighters, they close libraries early, they shut off the street lights, they put off critical maintenance because they just don't have the money. We have to start having a conversation about how we build places that are financially productive. So how do we do this? And I'm going to give a shout out here to my friends in California. Early in Strong Towns, I was able to go out and do a tour of California. We started in Redding in the north and we ended in San Diego. And I gave 11 talks in 5 days in this kind of whirlwind tour. It was great. It was great to be able to share the message outside of the Midwest, have people react to it in a really positive way. But as I would finish up every presentation, and by the way, for the rest of the presentation, we're going to talk about how we do things differently, how we look at things differently. As I would end up every presentation, some Californian would get up with pretty much the same question. Chuck, I'm really angry with you. You've come here and scared us, but what's the solution? Tell me now, what is the solution? And it took me a while to fully grasp what was being asked, because I was hearing them ask, what's the solution? And what they really meant was something slightly different. What they really meant was, what can someone else change about what they're doing so that I don't have to change what I'm doing? We've tried all of those solutions. Those are generally called kicking the can down the road. And Chris Martenson, I heard him say once this really key insight, and I think it's important for our conversation too. He said, problems have solutions, but predicaments have outcomes. We've crossed over from the problem stage here, and we're now in the predicament stage. And so we're not really talking about solutions to problems. We're talking about outcomes to predicaments, and how do we manage outcomes? And when we get into the notion of managing outcomes, what we at Strong Towns like to talk about are what we call rational responses. How do we, as thoughtful, intelligent people, look at this set of predicaments that we face, and together as a community roll up our sleeves and respond rationally? And when I start talking about rational responses, I always like to start with this photo here. This is, again, as my hometown back in the early 1900s. And when I first saw this photo, I was blown away. I had a hard time believing this was my city. The way the buildings line up, the way they frame the public realm at just the right ratios, the great segmentation of space. The buildings themselves front the street beautifully. They've got nice symmetry. This is a beautifully designed street. Now, pause here for a moment and consider a few things. How thick was the zoning code here? How many boards and committees did someone have to go to get an approval to build something? How much tax increment financing did they give out? How many federal grants did they receive? How much state subsidy? How many miles of pipe and road did they lay in anticipation of inducing this level of development? These people were a bunch of illiterate lumberjacks in the middle of nowhere. Look at the place that they built. All of the things that we have become convinced are absolutely necessary to making places successful today, they had none of them. They didn't even have 30-year mortgages. How do they build something like this? It's really, really simple. They just copied what they knew worked. They took the materials they had on hand and they built in a style and an approach that they had seen work for thousands and thousands of years around the world. After decades of engineers and planners and economic development advisors giving advice to cities, after all the regulations and the codes and the investments and the subsidies, after all the things we've done to create and induce growth, here's what this street looks like today. It's a wasteland of parking and half-occupied buildings. And if you want to understand in one photo why our cities are going broke, here's it is. There's $500,000 of public infrastructure in that little stretch of street right there. Where is the wealth that is going to take care of that generation after generation after generation? Now, when I showed this slide once in a lecture I was giving in Boise, Idaho, and a student raised their hand, stood up, said, Chuck, I'm from Costa Rica. Costa Rica is a very poor country. We can't afford to build the way that you build. When we build, we have to build one block at a time. And before we can build the next block, we have to make sure that every gap is filled in the block we just built. Otherwise, we won't be able to afford it. We're a very poor country. We can't afford to build this way. We're a very poor country now too. And we can't afford to build this way either. And for a long period of time, that illusion of wealth made us think that this kind of thing didn't matter, that we could have blocks and blocks and blocks with nothing on it. We could have acres devoted to storing cars for, short parts of the day. We could have, all this space with no productive building. We could build pipe all over the place. We could have huge, wasted spaces with massive infrastructure. We build frontage roads, which if you grasp the excess that is a frontage road, you're so rich, you only have to use one side of the pipe. These are things that are only brought about by the delusion that illusion of wealth created for us, that somehow we are rich and that the laws of, common sense economics don't make any sense at the local level, that we could be profligate and not have to worry about this stuff and just not care, not have it have any impact. This is what matters. And it's the cities that obsess over this kind of thing that are going to be the ones that are more successful in the coming years. The ones that continue this notion that we're a rich country and it doesn't matter, I think are the ones that are going to find themselves getting deeper and deeper into trouble. So if we're going to change our mindset, we have to start with our worst habits. Build It and They Will Come is a fantastic movie plot, right? Like I love movies. I love this movie. It has everything, right? Iowa, baseball, cornfields, like it's the perfect movie. Build It and They Will Come is a great movie plot. It's a terrible economic development strategy. We are in what we at Strong Towns call the desperation phase of this suburban experiment. If you want to be a player in the game today, you want to be a city and be taken seriously in the economic development game, what do you have to do? You have to have a bunch of shovel-ready sites. You've got to have a bunch of applications in for federal grants and state grants. You've got to have a team of experts standing by, ready to hand out subsidies should Google or someone else come trolling through town. I want to tell you, this isn't how cities build wealth. And this isn't how cities have ever built wealth. I'm going to show you right now the very, very simple way that cities go about building wealth. When I'm around the country speaking with audiences, most of them are people who have not heard this talk or a variation of this talk before. And so I ask them if they recognize this photo. And the reason I do is because I'm trying to get them to identify with this photo as the starting point of a community that they live in. Most cities, started like this. Every city that began before the Great Depression started just like this. Some little pop-up shacks, some hopes and some dreams, right? Manhattan started like this, right? Chicago started like this. San Francisco started like this. Vancouver, Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, they all started like this. We can go back in history. London started like this. Paris started like this. Rome started just like this. This could be, there could be a photo of Romulus and Remus standing in front of a bunch of pop-up huts, right? That's how every city in all of human history started. And because, this is a collection of my intimate friends on here and not some audience somewhere else, I'm going to pause here and just emphasize that I think if there's one concept to grasp in this entire presentation, it is this one right here that I'm going to give you right now. We built thousands of these across this country, little pop-up blocks just like this one. And for a variety of complex reasons that defy our ability to predict or project or even to fully understand after the fact, a lot of these places failed. What happens when a place like this fails? Does the stock market crash? Does unemployment skyrocket? Do we have to have an emergency session of Congress to bail out Wall Street banks? No. A few people lose a little bit of money. They made some small bets. These are private sector, tiny bets. Those bets didn't pay off. They salvage what they can and they move on to the next successful place. We built thousands of these across this continent. And for a variety of complex reasons that defy our ability to predict or project or even to fully understand after the fact, a lot of these places were successful. And when they were successful, they would grow in a very simple and easy to understand way. They would grow incrementally up, incrementally out, and become incrementally more intense. So this street, which is my hometown in 1870, after 30 years of growing incrementally, would become this street here. And after another 40 years of growing incrementally up, incrementally out, and becoming incrementally more intense, these 2- and 3-story wood structures would be converted into buildings of brick and granite. We don't build wealth by going to the casino and putting it all on red. The way we build wealth is by making small investments over a broad area over a long period of time. Let me show you how valuable this approach to building is. These are two identical blocks in my hometown. The one on the left, I've labeled old and blighted. The one on the right, I've labeled shiny and new. If you look at them, you'll see they're the same size, the same area, the same amount of public infrastructure. The only thing different about them is the style of development. That old and blighted block looks like this. In the 1920s, as my city was growing upward and outward and becoming more intense, the next 3 blocks of incremental out would have been this. This was the far edge of town in the 1920s. And had, what you're looking at here is like the cheapest commercial building you were going to build out on the edge of town. And had things continued as they had for thousands of years, what would we have expected to see? In time, you would have gotten a 2nd and 3rd story. The buildings would become more intense, more ornate. Of course, that's not what happened. After these were built, we had the Depression, we had World War II, and they made a completely new style of development that just skipped right over this stuff and started building way out on the edge. These blocks have stagnated for 90 years. 2 blocks over used to look just like this. The city got it torn down, labeled it blight, and now we've got the brand new Taco John's drive-through. This is actually right outside my window. Here, I can look out and see this. This is our Taco John's. Now, it's important to note that everybody here was thrilled about this transaction, right? We got rid of blight. We got something that meets all the zoning codes. It's got the right setbacks, the right parking ratios, the right floor area ratio, the right sign ordinance. It's got a little bit of green space there with some native plants in the stormwater area. They put in a little connection to sidewalk. They got rid of the on-street parking so the cars flow through more smoothly, speed up traffic. Everybody looked at this as a tremendous win. Here's the problem. That old blighted rundown block is worth $1.1 million. When this was built, it was worth $1.1 million. When this was built, that brand new taco joint, same size area, same amount of public infrastructure, but worth only $800,000. There's 42% more wealth in that old and blighted block than that shiny and new one. The city's actually collecting 42% more taxes from what they have labeled blight than what their zoning code actually calls for in this stretch. Understand what you're looking at. You are looking at the traditional pattern of development, the way we built places for thousands of years around the world. You are looking at it in its infancy after 90 years of neglect, and it outperforms by a wide, wide margin the stuff we build brand new today. And everybody, watching this video is well aware of the trajectory of the taco joint, right? 20 years from now, that taco joint will be a used car lot. There'll be a new taco joint up the road. 10 years later, we'll be trying to get a grant to get it torn down so we can get something new built there. We've all been around long enough to have seen this happen. This is not a long process. In fact, in the few years since this was actually built, here's what's happened to the values out there. We can all see the direction this is heading, right? That's what happens in the inside of our cities. Here's what is going on out on the edge. This is our Mills Fleet Farm complex. Mills Fleet Farm is a Midwestern big box store. Brainerd is the home of Mills Fleet Farm. This is the biggest one in the world. Very proud of that fact. Here, you've got a double-sized big box store, auto dealership, gas station. This is a 20-acre piece of property. This is the most valuable piece of land in the entire Brainerd Lakes area. If these people show up at a meeting, we just stop the meeting and ask them, like, what do you need, right? Here's 20 acres of the core downtown. If you have ever seen the movie Fargo, you've seen a not so flattering, but not so inaccurate portrayal of our downtown. this is a place where people are trying, but it's struggles. We have not had any new buildings here in my lifetime, quite a few that have burned down or been torn down and are now parking lots. Most of the second and third stories are not occupied. A lot of the first stories struggle to keep tenants. This is not the kind of place where when people come to visit, we take them, right? I wish it were, but it's not yet today. 20 acres out on the edge, we see a total value of 0.6 million an acre. It's a huge sum of money. This is a big pot of money in one lot. But when we look at that 20 acres downtown, just at the same area, just a different configuration, we see 78% more wealth. And oftentimes, that means 78% more property tax. But oftentimes, when we look at big box stores, we talk about the retail tax. The big box store on the left is a regional draw, draws people from miles and miles away. The one on the right, of course, is a very hyper local draw in many ways. The sales tax from these are essentially equivalent, despite the draw that they have. Now, how much should we spend to get that stuff out on the edge? We spent a couple $100 million on the bypass, tens of millions running sewer and water out to here, millions on frontage roads and backage roads. How much did my generation spend to get that stuff on the right? Nothing, right? That was stuff that my great grandparents and their peers assembled slowly and incrementally over time, and we just kind of slowly milked it down, right? What happens when Mills Fleet Farm goes out of business? It will someday, right? I mean, that's not, we've seen this happen. Every business has a life cycle. Someday it will not be a Mills Fleet Farm. What happens then? I don't know, but we've seen this happen in other places. We've seen it happen in my city in other places. And what happens is these buildings tend to stagnate. And if they're not boarded up and vacant, what they get in them next is quite a bit lower on the economic food chain than what is there now. What we can say with confidence is that this current condition is the peak, right? Like without some type of heroic intervention, this is the peak. Everything from this point on is just downhill. How about on the right? There are 134 different properties in that core 20 acres. What happens when one of them loses a tenant? What happens when one of them goes out of business or someone retires? What happens when, in our infinite wisdom, we figure out that, hey, we've got too much retail and not enough office, or too much office and not enough residential? Well, these buildings are very flexible. They're highly adaptable. They can become many, many different things. There's a lot of options here to adapt and change over time. You don't have to know the future to be able to make this work. There's a reason our ancestors built this way. And I say ancestors in the largest possible sense of the word. There's reasons why people around the world for thousands of years built this way. It is financially really productive. It creates a lot of wealth. It's very adaptable and it's very flexible. This is how you build something that stands the test of time. What I'm going to show you now are some models that my good friend Joe Minicozy and his team at Urban 3 in Asheville, North Carolina have put together. If you think of a farmer going out and spreading seed across a field, the parts of the field that grow up the most robustly, we call those the most productive parts of the field. That's where you get the greatest bushels per acre, for example. What we're going to look at here is value per acre. What kind of land use patterns create the greatest financial productivity? And I start with Buffalo, New York. I have a soft spot for Buffalo, New York. I really like it. But Buffalo, New York is kind of a desperate place. Buffalo has lost population every census since 1940. It's just been straight downhill. And for a city that was once one of the jewels of the world, really, this is an enormous fall from grace. A lot of decline, a lot of neglect. Yet when we step back and look and say, okay, where's the wealth in Buffalo? Can you point to the traditional downtown and the surrounding traditional neighborhoods? And not only is this, part of the community, a repository of wealth, despite the neglect, despite the decline, but it absolutely dwarfs everything around it. We see this in cities of all sizes. Here's another one about 60,000 from upstate New York, same kind of thing. Here's a little town by where I live. When I first went here, they said, Chuck, we've got some really good stuff happening out here. Got some really good stuff happening here. But these neighborhoods here are really rough. We got to figure out how to get those things torn down and get something good built. And then we showed them where all their wealth is in those poor neighborhoods. It's in the neighborhoods with all the poor people. We did a study in Lafayette, Louisiana, where we looked at not just the revenue being produced, the financial productivity, but also the costs. This again was Joe Minicozy at Urban 3 and his team. And I was able to assist with that and be part of that process. We sat down and we went through all of the revenue streams that the city has, utility bills, sales taxes, property taxes. And then we looked at every ongoing expense that the city had. And we mapped all that out and we mashed them together and we came up with this map here. Where you see green, you are seeing properties that are, in a strict accounting sense, cash flow positive. The higher the line goes, the more positive it is. We're seeing red, it's the opposite. Those are cash flow negative. You're in the red as an accounting term. The higher again it goes, the more in the red you are. Let me point out what's going on here. This right here is Lafayette's core downtown. Lafayette's core downtown is a lot like my downtown here. It's kind of run down. The people are trying. I think it's getting better. I think it's got a path to improvement. But today it's kind of struggling. Yet when we look at it just from a pure dollars and cents standpoint, it's absolutely killing it. There's an arc of green right through here. That stuff right there are the poor neighborhoods. Those are the neighborhoods where when we went there to get an Airbnb, the city staff said, yeah, don't go over in those neighborhoods. That's where the murders happen. That's where the burglaries happen. Like, stay out of that part of town. That's the poor part of town. All this stuff out here is red. What is this stuff out here? Those are the big box stores, the strip malls, the drive-through restaurants, the windy streets with the cul-de-sac subdivisions, the 3-car garages with the attached house. That's what that stuff is out there, all red. This map shows 2 subsidies, and they're essentially universal. They're subsidies we see in the American development pattern everywhere we look. Subsidy number 1, the poor neighborhoods subsidize the affluent neighborhoods. That's just a universal condition of the development pattern we see, is that neighborhoods that tend to be poor pay more in taxes per acre. They're more financially productive, and neighborhoods that we tend to look at as affluent are the exact opposite. They're on the receiving end of that subsidy. The second subsidy we see here is that future generations are subsidizing the present generation. Lafayette has over $50 million backlog of just road maintenance. Let's forget about all the underground stuff, but just look at roads. Every year that backlog grows. If they tripled the amount they're spending on roads, the backlog would still continue to grow. The typical family in Lafayette pays $1,500 a year in taxes to the city. They pay other taxes to the parish and the school district, but $1,500 to the city. If the city were going to maintain every bit of infrastructure represented in this map and meet every obligation that they've said they would meet, the median family's taxes would need to go from $1,500 a year to $9,200 a year. 1 out of every $5 that family makes would have to go just to maintaining the stuff they've already built. That is never going to happen. And that will never it's not even possible that will happen. That will never happen. And so the future generations of Lafayette, and they're already having to do this presently to a degree, but it's just going to increase in intensity. Future generations are going to have to decide what they take care of and what they don't, what obligations they keep and which ones they walk away from, what neighborhoods they save and what neighborhoods they don't. Now, we have a city in this country that is kind of going through that, right? Or has started that process or is well into that process. And when I travel around the country and I talk to people about Detroit, I get a lot of different narratives. Pretty much, if you're on the radical left or you're on the radical right, you can look at Detroit and kind of impose your narrative onto it, right? It's corrupt government. It's greedy corporations. It's lazy bureaucrats. It's those people. Whatever your narrative of what's wrong with the country, you can impose it on Detroit and then kind of just, not have to think about it, just walk away and say, that's the problem, and kind of wall yourself off from it. Here's what I see when I look at Detroit. I see a city that got started 20 years earlier than everybody else and arrived at the logical destination 20 years ahead of everybody else. Before the Great Depression, Detroit was already becoming the motor city. Detroit was the one who ran the highways through the middle of the city first. They ripped down the buildings in order to have parking lots. They ran sewer and water out on the edge and started growing and growing and growing horizontally around this new experiment, this new pattern of development. They created the first auto-oriented suburbs. They were moving out at a rate and a pace that was quicker than everybody else. And when we got to the end of World War II, and we looked around to say, where's a great American city that can help keep us out of the next depression that we can copy? The ideas for that largely came from Detroit. Detroit's not an anomaly. It's not a basket case in the sense that it's different from any of us. Detroit's just early. When we look at some of these building types, it gives us a sense of what is possible and what we can do. Here's a Kmart. These are in North Carolina, but they could be anywhere. We see these same ratios all over the place. Kmart, $384,000 an acre. Here's a Walmart at $967,000. Yet when we go to the downtown, we see an old abandoned warehouse at $5 million an acre. It's now a supper club. And my favorite of all time, Jimmy's Pizza, $3.4 million an acre. Now, the question that we should have for ourselves when we step back and we look at the landscape that we've created and we stop experiencing our cities at 30 or 40 miles an hour, and we start experiencing them at 2 miles an hour, what we come to grips with pretty quickly is that American cities are nothing but gaps. There are huge gaps between everything. Everything is gigantic, supersized, and there are massive gaps in all of it. So when we step back and we look at that and we understand that, the question that we really have to struggle with is, do we have the wherewithal, the intelligence, the capabilities to construct and manage something as sophisticated and refined as Jimmy's Pizza? Because if that's the bar that we can meet, if that's the only bar we can pass, look at how much wealth we can start to build. And not way out on the edge where we've got to put a bunch more pipe in and a bunch more stream, but in those gaps, in those places where we've got stuff today already in the ground that we're not making very good use of, that we need to make way better use of and make far more productive. Can we do something as exquisite as Jimmy's Pizza? Because if that's all we are capable of doing, and I really think we're capable of doing more, but if that's it, if that's all we can handle, look at the wealth we can build. And we all understand too the economics of a Jimmy's Pizza, right? None of these places, whether you like them or not, have floats in your 4th of July parade, volunteer on the PTA, are serving on the city council or the library board. None of these places are doing those things. That's not what they're there for. Therefore, they're there to suck the wealth out of your community. And whether you think Jimmy's Pizza is a great place to be eating or what have you, we know where the profits in Jimmy's Pizza end up, right? First, they end up in Jimmy, and then they end up everywhere else around town. And that is a big distinction that we can't casually walk away from. How do we get started, right? Because Jimmy's Pizza, the thing about Jimmy's Pizza a lot of times is that it seems beneath us, right? We like to look at ourselves as greater than that. Like we would have to humble ourselves to do something like Jimmy's Pizza. But I think humble ourselves is exactly where we're at right now and exactly how we need to be thinking. This is a great project in Memphis, Tennessee. a little street called Broad Avenue. Broad Avenue used to have a streetcar stop. City ran a highway through the middle of the neighborhood, pulled out the streetcar line, and without that traffic, without the ability of people to walk back and forth from the neighborhood, these blocks just died. Some residents, fed up with the decline and the neglect, took matters in their own hands. They went out, they worked with the property owners to get the buildings swept out. They swept up the sidewalks. They painted their own bike lanes. They painted their own crosswalks. They invited businesses to come in and open up and just show people in a demonstration kind of way what could happen. So for one weekend, they had businesses from all over the community come in and open up and just show people, here's what's possible. This isn't the most spectacular street in all of Memphis. This isn't the most wonderful thing that's ever been built. People don't flock here from around the country, but it's a heck of a lot better than what was there before. And not only is it a heck of a lot better, but you've got 18 new businesses, 30 plus new jobs, $12 million of blight that is now back on the tax rolls, a total public investment of zero. When we step back and we look at our cities today and we realize that they're all gaps, what we have to understand is that the investments that we need today, 2017, the investments that we need are not on the scale of the Hoover Dam. They're not on the scale of the WPA. They're not on the scale of the CCC. They're not some massive thing. What we need are just small little things, right? We don't need any more mega projects. What our cities need more than anything else are thousands and thousands and thousands of little things, taking care of business, the little details. I like to use, Lee Iacocca in the 80s was enticed to come back to Chrysler. And one of the kind of things about Lee Iacocca is that he replaced these people who were trying to hit like moonshots all the time, right? Trying to do home runs. And he said, we're a car company. We just got to be a better car company. We just got to take care of the details. And that's kind of was his thing. He was known as like a guy who takes care of the details. And he was able to turn the company around and make it far more profitable. At the city level, we're all about the moonshot. We're all about the big transformative thing. We're all about the big ribbon cutting. And really what our cities need and what the investments that actually pay off are these small little things. Here in my hometown, right outside the door here, in that neighborhood with the old and blighted block and the Taco John's, we spent a year out there working, a good friend, Justin Bursley, and I, just looking at where people in this neighborhood struggled and then asking a simple question: what is the next smallest thing we can do to address those struggles? And when you're a city and you're people living in a city and you're trying to figure out like what's the first step that we do, the first step we do is to humble ourselves to ask those questions, to realize that, in complex cities where we can't predict and project or fully understand what has happened, we have to actually humble ourselves to say, we don't have the answer. We don't know. But here's how we go about finding out. We observe people and we observe where they struggle. And then we ask ourselves, what is the next smallest thing we can do right now to address that struggle? I showed my city engineer, I said, I think we could use a sidewalk here. His response, why would you say that, Chuck? And in fact, they recently just redid that street, no sidewalk. No trail, no nothing. We just ignored that. Why? Because we get our information from behind a desk. We go to a public hearing. We have a survey. We do vision sessions with sticker charts on the walls. No, 2017 America, that's not where we're at. That's not where we're at. Where we are at and what we need to do is go out and humble ourselves to watch and observe people, humbly observe people, and see where they are struggling to use the community as it's been built. And then respond to that by asking that one question: what is it that we can do right now? Right now, what is the next smallest thing we can do to address that struggle? And if we iterate that day after day, week after week, year after year, in neighborhood after neighborhood after neighborhood, not only will we be making small, high returning, low risk kind of investments, not only will we be improving our balance sheet and making our cities financially strong and healthy, but we're not going to be able to avoid improving people's lives in the process. And if that's not why we're here, I'm not sure why we're here. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us. I'm going to ask you one last time, if you made it to this point here, go to the website, strongtowns.org, join the movement today, be part of this, be part of getting this message in front of as many people in the country as can hear it. We're out on the road all the time. We're publishing stuff all the time. We're always looking at ways to get this in front of more and more people. We're really at a point in this movement where we've got a lot of this figured out, and now we need resources. We need resources. We need members. We need your support to help us do this even more. We've really got it figured out. It's just a matter now of scale, and how do we get this in front of more people? How do we get this message in the New York Times? How do we get it on CNN? How do we get it in front of your city council? Those are the visions that we have today, and we really need your support to make it happen. I am going to finish this thing up now, and then I am going to head over to my favorite pizza place, and we are going to do a Slack chat till I got to go pick up my kids, which is like 2 hours. So we're going to have lots of time to do it. So if you're on the Strongtown Slack, head on over there. I'll be in the scheduled Slack chat room here in about 10 minutes. If you're not on the Strongtown Slack, go to strongtowns.slack.com. Make a request to be in the room. We will get you in there and make you part of the conversation. And not only this conversation, but the conversation there is going on and on and on all the time, and you're welcome to be part of it. My inbox has over 400 messages in it right now. Breaking news, I'm not going to get back to everybody. And so if you are someone who has questions, if these ideas are percolating around in your mind, we have nearly 1,000 people on our Slack chat. There's someone there who's going to help you think through these thoughts. And I'm there too. I participate as much as I can. But go there, get involved in this conversation, add your thoughts, add your ideas, and while you're on your way, become a member of Strong Towns. Thanks, everybody. See you in a little bit, and keep doing what you can to build strong towns. Thanks, everybody.